On a quiet stretch of road just outside the small town of Fayetteville, West Virginia, the Sodder family home once stood. It was on a gentle rise overlooking the darkness of the Appalachian hills. In the winter of 1945, Fayetteville was a place defined by coal dust. Church bells and the slow rhythms of rural American life defined the town. World War II had ended only months earlier. The nation was trying to settle back into something resembling peace. Christmas had come and gone, and the air carried that peculiar stillness that follows the holidays, when decorations remain but the celebration has already faded into memory. It was here in the early hours of December 25th that one of the most enduring and unsettling mysteries in American history began. George and Jenny Sodder were not wealthy, but they were known. George, an Italian immigrant who had come to the United States as a teenager, ran a successful trucking and coal business. He was outspoken, particularly in his criticism of Benito Mussolini, a stance that had earned him quiet enemies among some members of the local Italian-American community. Jenny managed the household, raising their 10 children in a modest but lively home. On Christmas Eve, the family had celebrated late into the night. The older children lingered, excited by gifts and sugar, while George and Jenny eventually went to bed around 10:30 p.m., straight to bed. They left 5 of their children awake downstairs: Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, Irene, and Betty. At approximately 12:30 Jenny Sodder was jolted awake by the sound of something striking the roof, followed by a rolling noise she could not immediately identify. She drifted back to sleep, uneasy but unconcerned. Less than an hour later, she awoke again, this time to the smell of smoke. Flames were already licking up the stairway. George shouted for the children and attempted to climb the steps, only to be driven back by thick smoke and fire. The staircase collapsed shortly after. What followed unfolded in frantic, desperate moments. George ran outside to retrieve a ladder that was usually propped against the house, only to find it missing. He tried to drive one of his trucks closer to the house to climb onto the roof, but neither vehicle would start, despite working perfectly the day before. Neighbors were alerted, but the town's fire department was unresponsive, delayed by poor communication and lack of manpower. By the time help arrived, the house had been reduced to ashes. At dawn, as smoke drifted over the blackened remains, George and Jenny stood before what was left. They believed that 5 of their children had perished in the flames, yet almost immediately troubling inconsistencies emerged. No bones, no skull fragments, no remains of any kind were found in the rubble. Local officials assured the family that the fire had burned hot enough to completely cremate the children's bodies. George, who had worked with coal and fire his entire adult life, did not accept this explanation. He knew that even intense house fires typically leave behind skeletal remains. In the days that followed, the Sodders' grief began to intertwine with doubt. Witnesses came forward with unsettling accounts. A woman claimed she saw children matching the Sodders' description looking out of a car traveling away from Fayetteville. On the night of the fire, a motel employee in Charleston later reported that 5 children accompanied by adults had checked in during the early morning hours. Another woman claimed she served breakfast to a group of children fitting their descriptions the following morning. None of these sightings were formally pursued. George and Jenny commissioned their own investigation. They sifted through the ashes themselves, uncovering small household items that should have been destroyed if the fire were as intense as officials claimed. To test the fire's capacity, George conducted an experiment, burning animal bones in an open pit for hours. The bones remained identifiable. The official explanation began to feel less like a conclusion and more like a convenient closure. Then there were the warnings. In the months before the fire, a life insurance salesman had visited the Sodder home. When George declined a policy, the salesman reportedly grew angry, warning that the house would go up in smoke and the children would be destroyed. Another man, a former employee, later admitted he had sabotaged the Sodders' trucks that night, claiming he believed the fire was insurance fraud. Though no policy existed, a neighbor stated he had seen a man throwing what appeared to be incendiary devices onto the Sodder roof just before the fire broke out. Years passed, but the Sodders did not move on. They erected a large billboard along Route 16 displaying photographs of the missing children. Offering a reward for information, it became a silent monument to unresolved grief, watched by passing cars and changing seasons. In 1949, they pressured authorities to exhume the site once more. This time, fragments of bone were discovered. A forensic examination determined they belonged to an adult male, not to any of the Sodder children, and had likely been planted. In 1907, more than 2 decades after the fire, the family received a letter postmarked from Kentucky. Inside was a photograph of a young man with dark hair and sharp features. On the back, written in shaky script, were the words, "Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie. I lil boys. A90132 or 35. Louis Sodder would have been in his early 30s at the time. The resemblance was striking enough to reignite hope, but attempts to trace the letter led nowhere. George Sodder died in 1969, never abandoning his belief that his children had survived. Jenny wore black for the rest of her life. The billboard remained standing for decades, its images fading but never removed. Officially, the case was closed. Unofficially, it never was. The disappearance of the Sodder children remains suspended between grief and suspicion, between fire and absence, between what was lost and what may have been taken. And even now, as the landscape around Fayetteville has changed, and the world has moved further away from 1945, the question lingers in the quiet spaces left behind. How do 5 children vanish without a trace? And how does a fire consume a home, but not its mystery?